Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back again with Juggernaut. Yes, we're back again with the Juggernaut solo series written by Fabian Nicieza, probably one of the coolest writers that Marvel has. And we're picking up with the trial of Juggernaut, right? This is where the Juggernaut was basically summoned to court for all the damage he's caused, or at least a huge chunk of damage that he's caused. And what they're using here is evidence for a fight between himself and Spider-Man. And they're kind of pointing out the idea that like the fight between the two of them had caused millions of dollars worth of damage, right? And that Cain Marko was not being mind controlled, right? His actions were his own, his choices were his own, and that Carmine Angelo, right, this kind of New York City born and bred guy, lost his scrappy construction company. Now the whole thing is kind of being watched by D-Cell, and technically I guess she can record it because she's considered herself to be part of the press, which what really makes a person part of the press, right? I don't know if you really have to have like press credentials per se. I think it's just like, I've got a phone and I want to document this, so I am part of the press now. Whether or not you're recognized that way by the rest of the press is a whole different discussion. But one of the things that kind of comes out of this, and this is what's cool, is that you have the defense attorney essentially for Cain Marko coming out and saying, yeah, but Cain Marko was not the one who destroyed this guy's, this guy's cement, right? This guy's whole cement company. That was Spider-Man who did that. That was collateral damage of the conflict, and Spider-Man was the one who caused it. Now, this is one of the interesting things that you don't really see here, because when it comes to the superheroes and the supervillains fighting each other, on the whole, all the collateral damage that gets done, right? So buildings being torn up or being smashed and destroyed, things like that, that's all handled by Damage Control Incorporated, right? It's a company with a government contract to clean up after the superheroes. And they don't really differentiate between who did what. It's just a matter of this was destroyed and then that's it. They usually use something like eyewitness evidence or video evidence or something along those lines to kind of figure out who caused what damage. But in this instance, Cain Marko was also stuck inside that concrete for months, right? Like for months on end. But Spider-Man is really the one that kind of brought this down. Now, it's not because Spider-Man was being terrible. It's because that's just the nature of what happens when superheroes fight supervillains. And so in the midst of this whole trial, everything basically goes south. And what you end up getting is the arrival of essentially a Sandman character, but not the Sandman that you're used to. But before we get into that, we actually end up jumping back to a few months ago and kind of get this explanation of how it was that Cain Marko got his powers. And this is somewhat of an interesting concept that Marvel's rolling in here. In his journey to find a new Juggernaut suit, he's basically brought to North Korea. And as he gets there, he ends up finding what is in essentially the Forge of Sidorak, right? Now, the Forge of Sidorak is this concept designed to basically build things that are in the likeness of Sidorak or to honor Sidorak. That's kind of the way this all works. We talked about the Octessence, the fact that Sidorak is one of 8 demon entities that kind of was part of a giant competition to essentially take control of the world, and whoever it was, whoever's forces ended up destroying the other forces would come out on top. I guess a little more explanation is needed there. So what you have is the Octessence, and this is basically 8 demon entities, each of which were arguing over who's the most powerful. And the way this worked is that each one of them put an artifact on Earth, and when the first artifact was picked up, it would begin the Octessence, and that's what happened with Cain Marko. He picked up the Crimson Gem of Sidorak, he became the Juggernaut, but he also started the Octessence. Now that whole thing came to a head in the 8th Day storyline, but the idea is that once the first artifact was picked up, it would drive 7 other people to want to grab the other artifacts, and they in turn would split humanity into 8s, and then they would all go to war with each other. And whichever army came out on top, that being out there that represents that army would prove to be the most powerful one. So if Juggernaut basically, wiped out all the other avatars of the other demon entities, and then wiped out all the other 7/8 of humanity, then it would prove that Sidorak was the most powerful. Now the 8th Day event was stopped, especially because of Thor. He had a huge hand in that, but this is the reason why these kind of forges are created, is because they're designed to honor these various entities. And there's some out there, right, for like Watum, different people out there, different beings out there like that. There's other forges out there and other artifacts out there like that. We just don't really see them anymore. But when Cain Marko gets in here, he's basically looking for a new suit, and he tells the guy this, and the guy's like, well, a lot of people have come here looking for, something of Sidorak, like looking to serve as the host of Sidorak. What makes you special? And that's when Cain Marko reveals he's actually the Juggernaut. And the guy points up above, and you basically see that a new suit's been created out of the Crimson Bands of Sidorak. The Crimson Bands of Sidorak are historically something used by Stephen Strange, and that's one of the things to understand about Doctor Strange himself, is he doesn't really have any powers unto himself. Instead, his powers are lent to him by other people, right? They're lent to him by other beings. So Sidorak, for example, lends Doctor Strange the Crimson Bands. Now, it seems as though these Crimson Bands are no longer being lent to Stephen Strange, because now they're being forged into a new suit suit of armor. And that's what this guy does, right? Now, the other problem with this is that he spent all this time building this armor under the belief that Sidorak would see what he'd done and then see him as a new host, right? He would say like, you know, I bless you with becoming my new avatar because of the work you've put in to make this suit. But as we know, Sidorak's kind of a jerk, and that never happened. It seemed like Sidorak was just waiting for Kane Marco to return. And so the two of them essentially get into a kind of scuffle, right? But ultimately, Kane Marco ends up coming out on top, and in this whole great big huge fight, the chains that are holding the suit up are basically destroyed. And when that happens, the suit falls onto Kane Marco and bonds itself to him, and he emerges as the new Juggernaut. And that's how he got his new suit. Now, what its full capabilities are, we don't entirely know. Usually whenever Marvel changes up the suit of a character, especially somebody like Juggernaut, because his powers come from the Crimson Gem, it stands to reason that there'll be upgrades, right? There'll be changes. We saw that with Donny Cates's Venom, for example. When Venom encountered Null, he was awakened to a whole new host of abilities he didn't realize he had before. So that's usually what ends up happening here, is that things end up shifting up. Jumping back to the current moment right now, you end up having D-Cell kind of holding off this Sandman-esque character as best as she possibly can. The funny thing about this is that the voice that's emanating from Sandman, which basically says like, give me the girl and no one will get hurt. This voice really seems to be female. And as we know historically, Sandman is a guy. Not only that, this voice is German, right? And so it doesn't look like it's the actual Sandman. It looks like somebody who has the powers of Sandman, right? Who took his powers or something along those lines. But then of course, D-Cell kind of chimes in and says her name is Quicksand. And so what you end up getting is of course Juggernaut jumping in. But the funny thing about him is that much like the fights with Spider-Man, you can't really fight Sandman in the traditional sense. You can't punch, you know, anybody who's able to use sand in that way because it's sand, right? All they do is create an opening or you fly right through them or something like that. Instead, you have to do what Spider-Man historically did, which is use water, right? That's what you normally have to do. But Kane Marco hasn't quite figured that out yet. And in fact, it's not even really Kane Marco who figures that out. Instead, where you have this great big huge conflict and you have D-Cell kind of watching all this unfold, there's a couple things that happen here. The first is that D-Cell is referred to as a mutant. Hence the reason why I said in the last video, that's probably what she's going to end up being. The second thing that's referred to here is that they basically realize that she has a kind of energy source in her head. And in order to basically stop her, you've got to remove her head, essentially. Now, again, this is where things get a little murky here because we don't know if she's an actual being, if she's just some kind of psychic entity that took on a energetic form and just coalesced into a form of sand. And that's where we are right now. We don't really know how all that works. But what we do know is that they end up basically severing this kind of energy source in the head from the rest of the body. And when Kane Marco was able to pull that off, when he does that, kind of using this great big huge piece of metal like a sword, when he cuts it off and basically beheads the girl, which is kind of screwed up, that's when this energy source is extracted. And when it's extracted, there's this kind of realization, they sort of go through and start analyzing it, and they realize this has a somewhat unique energy signature, and that this energy signature that it has comes from only one particular location. And when the question is, where's this location coming from, that it basically comes from Absolution Solutions, right? Now, anybody who knows anything about Absolution Solutions knows who it is that runs this whole program, that their director of research is Arnomzola, right? Like the old school villain. Now, before you guys are kind of like, yeah, Arnomzola kind of sucks. Arnomzola in more recent years, especially during Rick Remender's run of Captain America, was actually amazing. Like he literally had his own pocket dimension that he had sort of cultivated and created, and Captain America was actually stuck in there for a time. Arnomzola, the funny thing about him is he's a highly capable scientist. He's just one of these guys that largely gets ignored by Marvel, which you wouldn't think would be the case, especially in the aftermath of Captain America: The Winter Soldier. I guess you really haven't seen a lot from Arnomzola since then, but he's quite literally one of the most dangerous minds in all of Marvel Comics, right? So I'm kind of curious to see where they go with this, right? I'm kind of curious to see what's happening, but the big takeaway is that Arnomzola is experimenting on superhuman prisoners. So who knows what kind of forces we're going to see the Juggernaut face off against, which is really what I'm the most excited for. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.